Hi, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking at how important CATI is in market research in 2021 and looking at the software that supplies and serves that particular sector in market research. Join me in today's podcast looking at CATI in market research. Hi, I'm Phil Hearn, and in today's podcast, I'd be looking at the importance of CATI in market research in 2021 and looking at the software that supplies that particular data collection methodology and looking at some of the key things that software should have to supply that market well. But I'm going to start by looking at perhaps where CATI is in 2021. Is it something that's really quite a small part of business now and diminishing, or is it still having a healthy chunk of the market? If you look at any trade press or attended any conferences or more likely online events recently, the message you would have heard is online, 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 and perhaps more online. But does that tell the whole story about what data collection methodologies are being used in market research? And is CATI dead? I took a look at SMR's industry statistics for 2020, and I did actually find some surprises. Now, I accept, first of all, that 2020 wasn't a normal year, but in terms of the percentage of data collected by different methods, 2020 was actually quite similar to 2019. There was some movement towards digital and online and qualitative, but generally things didn't move that much in terms of percentages. Now, of course, in revenue terms, there were some serious struggles in many countries throughout the world, and indeed in most markets, there was a contraction of business being conducted by the market research sector, and that contraction was 15 to 30% in many cases, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less, but significant. Now, to be fair, looking at industry statistics is open to a lot of subjective interpretation. But let me share some of the data that I found. The first thing to say is that measuring the size of the research insights market is increasingly more complex. Research is growing into new areas such as automated digital data and electronic data, perhaps making it difficult to compare with previous years in the market research business. I looked at traditional quantitative market research with a view to looking at CATI's place in that particular area. And by traditional quantitative market research, I include CATI itself, of course, face-to-face, online quantitative research, mobile smartphone quantitative research, and audience measurement. So I was actually excluding online traffic, digital measurement, social media monitoring or social listening, and just including what I called traditional quantitative market research. And of course, all qualitative research was being excluded from this comparison. The surprise perhaps for me was that across almost every continent of the world, the percentage of traditional quantitative market research conducted by CATI is around 20% in terms of revenue. Higher perhaps than you would expect if you look at topics discussed at conferences, press adverts, online mail shots that you perhaps get. Most of the sources of information that you're getting will give you the impression that it's all about online, online, and online, as I said earlier. It might surprise some that the ratio in terms of revenue from CATI to online quantitative is about 2 to 1 globally. That's in favour of online. So for every dollar of CATI research, there's $2 of online research. And if you look at that, when you combine together online quantitative with mobile online research, that goes to about 3 to 1 in terms of the ratio between online versus CATI. Now, unlike CATI, and unsurprisingly perhaps, the global reach of online quantitative and mobile quantitative research, it's not consistent across all the regions of the world. There are some differences. So whereas CATI has that 20% cut, as it were, or market of the traditional quantitative research market, that's not true when it comes to the other methods that data is collected. For example, face-to-face accounts for more than 50% of research in LATAM, Africa, and the Middle East, and just under 40% in Asia. So some real differences there. In Europe and North America, and in Asia, online and mobile brings in about 3.5 times the income of CATI surveys. In Asia, online exceeds CATI by an even larger ratio. But some huge discrepancies between different markets make regional comparison difficult in Asia. For example, comparing what's going on in Indonesia to China to Japan, you'll see completely different patterns, and they are completely different economies. In Latin America, online and mobile are twice as high as CATI when put together. Yet, when you come to Africa and the Middle East, they're almost the same in terms of revenue. So what does this mean? Well, while CATI might have a smaller share in North America and Europe, it's a smaller share of some big markets. And while other regions of the world continue to find CATI as an effective way of contacting respondents, and so it's a good source of income for many research agencies. So to answer my own question that I posed earlier, is CATI dead? I would say no, it still represents a significant part of research turnover. This brings me on to the state of the software market for CATI. How is that maturing, or is it actually maturing at all? One thing that I notice is that there are very few new products. Most of the new software that's coming out is really connected with online surveys, online dashboards, digital research, and so on. So not much new in the CATI market. Does that mean then that no one's really investing in improving the CATI? Does everyone see it as a market that's gradually going to disappear over time? Well, perhaps, and perhaps that's the reason that software companies aren't investing huge sums of money generally in producing new products that might do CATI better or more efficiently. So let's look at some of the things that differentiate CATI products, because there's a lot of CATI products out there still. Some have disappeared over the years as CATI has contracted from where it was perhaps in the 1990s, sort of pre-online. But what things differentiate different CATI products from one another? So let's look at that. So one of the things that I've always sort of talked about when I'm talking about CATI software is the difference between what I call true CATI software and, I suppose people won't like it if I call it this, but fake CATI software. So I know there's some suppliers of online surveys who say, well, you can use our software for CATI interviews. And indeed, an interviewer could sit with a headset, pull up an online questionnaire and fill it in for the respondent over the phone. But in my mind, that misses a big point. It might work for a small operation where you've got perhaps 1 or 2 or 3 interviewers, but it's not what I call real CATI software. Real CATI software should have all the things that you need to manage a CATI software. And the sort of things I'm thinking about there, the ability to call back respondents. So if you ring a respondent and they ask to set an appointment for another day at another time, the system automatically flags that and feeds that interview to an available interviewer at the requisite time. So that is important, I think, callbacks. And again, most online software, which I call fake CATI software, doesn't have that facility to make that callback. We then come on to things like breaks in the questionnaire. So if somebody gets halfway through an interview and actually says, well, I'm sorry, I'm busy now, can I complete this survey at another time? So like a callback, but an interrupted interview, the software needs to start the survey again at the same place. Now, actually, some online systems do this quite well anyway. So if, as an online respondent, you're filling in a questionnaire and you leave at question 9, You'll come back to it later if you rejoin the interview at question 10. So that does make sense, and perhaps that's one area that online does match the CATI world, if you like. But there are other things as well. So there's things like auto dialers. You wouldn't have that typically with an online system. Sample management is very important so that you can manage your sample, load up more samples so that you can conduct more interviews. And of course, there's the benefit, of course, of having an interviewer present who can actually lead the respondent through the interview, which I think becomes quite important when it's a long questionnaire or a complex questionnaire. So there's some very real reasons where you need real CATI software to manage a project. Online systems do some of those things. An interviewer could read out a question, but things like sample management, callbacks, really aren't managed by an online system. The next split between different CATI products is the difference between whether you script the surveys to use them or you have a graphical user interface where the person setting up the questionnaire selects things from menus. Now, there's been a move at one point from graphical user interfaces to scripting, and in some ways that's gone back again now. And indeed, there's some hybrids now where you can do some stuff through menu systems, and you also have a scripting language that sits underneath it that you can actually write script to script your questionnaires. Now, there's two or three things I think are quite important to consider when you look at this comparison between scripting and having a graphical user interface. One of the things is that if you've only got a small team, that scripting can become quite a dear option, because having somebody in place all the time who can script the surveys, may be that they've not got a lot to do, or they're overpaid for that particular role. But that might be a small consideration and might be dependent on the volume of work. Certainly, staff training will be very different. If you're using a scripting language, it takes far longer to train staff if you're using a scripting language. And things like making errors, it's much easier to make errors when you're scripting. Now, on the other side of that, a graphical user interface works really well if you want junior people to set up questionnaires. So there's some real sort of things to consider there. But of course, scripting does have some advantages. It means you can take shortcuts. It means that you could probably do things quicker with trained staff. You can prepare questionnaires more quickly. You can reuse bits of code or parts of questionnaires perhaps more easily you can with a graphical user interface. And if there's very repetitive sections of a questionnaire, that becomes a little bit easier typically in a scripting language. So there's some pluses and minuses there depending on what your preference is and the volume of work you're trying to handle. Now, another thing that's worth consideration is whether you need mixed mode. And again, actually, there's a couple of points to this. I know there's some software that claims to be mixed mode, in that you can turn a survey from online to telephone to a paper to a CAPI survey at the click of a button, and they do that very well indeed. But a lot of software, or several software products, actually collect the data differently, and it's almost like having different surveys. So if you were to collect it as a CAPI survey and as an online survey and as a CATI survey, you might end up with three mismatched data files, because you've actually got three systems collecting data slightly differently, which will maybe mean combining it all together not easy, maybe time consuming to work through. So that's another consideration. Now, there are some mixed mode packages out there that do this very well, but it's certainly a consideration. And the fourth consideration, I think, is network versus online. Do you run it on your own internal hardware, using a server to manage your CATI software, or do you do it online? Do you use cloud software to actually manage everything to do with your survey? Now, one thing that's really important with all CATI surveys is there's got to be a steady flow to the survey, so that data is collected steadily and that respondents don't notice any gaps in the dialogue. So if a system at the end of answering one particular question goes off and saves that answer and comes back with the next question, and there's a noticeable delay of maybe 10 seconds, that can seem like a long while and have a fairly uncomfortable feel to an interview. It may be okay once, but if it happens 3 or 4 times, that can be a problem. And that can be one of the issues with running something on hardware on hardware within an office against running something that's online using the cloud. If there's a slow internet connection or an unstable internet connection, that's going to be problematic. So that's something to think about and consider when you're using CATI software. So having looked at those things, how does our software QPSMR fit into that? Is it real and fake was the first topic that I raised, and it is real. It's very real. It has a proper CATI system where it manages callbacks, it does auto dialing, it manages sample, and really is a professional tool for handling CATI surveys. It's not designed for anything else. That's what the QPSMR CATI module is all about. And what's more, it's got tied to it a complete system for analysing the data, and also because it has an analysis tool with it, so it comes with it as part of the standard software, what it means is that you can build your own reports analysing perhaps interviewer performance and length of time of interviews and how much of a questionnaire someone is answering and so on. So you have a complete system you can build on the back to analyse data how you want, that you're collecting both system data and survey data within QPSMR. So it's not just a CATI bit of software that gives you some data that you can analyse elsewhere. All within the same package, you can analyse that data, produce your own reports, supervisor reports, data reports, and survey analysis reports, all in one system. Is it mixed mode? QPSMR isn't fully mixed mode. It doesn't handle online surveys. It does handle paper surveys and CAPI surveys, and that is true mixed mode, so that data will be collected in one universal format regardless of the method that you've used, whether it be paper, CAPI or CATI. If you want online, our solution is to connect to an online software, and Snap is the product we recommend there, and QPSMR and Snap are very compatible so that they can link together very easily to turn a software in one product to a survey in another. And as for the staff using QPSMR, well, we always get very positive feedback, and the way that QPSMR builds a questionnaire is using the standard interface that people use, a graphical user interface for inputting the questions, putting in all the routing instructions and so on. So that's just standard within the system. And all that you have to learn to turn it into a CATI interview is to understand the graphical user interface that then lets you set up the questionnaire to share amongst interviewers and so on, and have set quotas and so on. So it really is a complete system for CATI that staff find very easy to get off the ground and use. So where is CATI in 2021, which is where I started? I think as far as we can see for now, it's here to stay. I'm not sure it's going to grow as a methodology for collecting data, but it's certainly here to stay. There aren't many new products coming out on the market. We're really, as an industry, we tend to be stuck with the ones we have, I think, generally. And take care, because online may not be a good solution, or an online piece of software may not be a good solution, particularly if you start with 2 or 3 interviews and then expand to a bigger team of 5, 10 interviewers. It starts to become very difficult to manage projects that are really designed for online when you're trying to conduct CATI interviews. So that's my session here on looking at CATI in market research in 2021. If you've got any questions, please send them to me. I'm always happy to answer your questions or any thoughts that you have. My email address is phil.hearn@mrdcsoftware.com. Thanks for joining me today, and goodbye.